Everybody, so welcome to Chapter 2, Understanding a CER Part 2. This chapter, I really wanted to show you some student examples from students that I currently teach in high school social studies right now. Now, these examples are really just meant for you to get an idea of what a CER should look like and what different levels of a CER looks like. Now, there are two examples, and they are from different prompts, but between the two examples, it is pretty clear in which one is the exemplar or which one would score higher than the other one. One is really middle of the road, one is really a strong CER. So these are two examples of what student work should look like. Now, it's obviously not going to look exactly the same. It really depends on what grade your students are in, where they're at in the year, and really where the individual's writing skills are. So in this first example, the question is, were workers treated fairly during the Gilded Age? Now, this was an objective for the day where students were, by the end of the class, the goal was for students to be able to articulate how workers were treated during the Gilded Age. And the idea was that workers were treated badly, and this really began to spark workers' unions and eventually reform going into the 1900s. So not a really heavy question or difficult question to answer, but the idea here today was to practice writing a CER while still answering this question. I provided a text from Newsela or Newsela, which is an online resource, and gave it to my students to read. They were aware of the CER question that they had to answer. Therefore, while reading, I told them to be looking for their answer or forming their answer, and to be looking for evidence that they could use to support their answer. So in this student sample, I made a quick correction. They started off with they, and of course in a complete sentence we wouldn't want to say they. We would want our students to be a bit more specific. I then highlighted and color-coded the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning. So, were workers treated fairly during the Gilded Age? They were not treated fairly in many ways. That's the claim. The factory owners discriminated against many people, offered no benefits or health coverage. If you were injured, you got nothing, and children could work in dangerous factories at the age of 8. The workers formed unions to try and bargain with the owners, but most of them had little to no success. This continued up until that was the evidence. So really two chunks of evidence. And then this continued up until the First World War, and in some cases past it. And that is the reasoning. So if I were looking, or when I was looking at this and looking at a rubric, I would say, okay, yes, they have the claim, but it's not super specific. Many ways is pretty vague. So my feedback would be, let's say they were treated fairly, and say something specific about that. They were not treated fairly because the factories that they worked in were dangerous. So something a little bit more specific. For the evidence, for this student in particular, I would suggest that they just pick one piece of evidence to support their claim, to really make it hit home, be clear, concise, and to the point. However, I think my biggest piece of feedback for this student would be the reasoning. Although they do have a sentence to wrap up the paragraph, they really don't have a sentence that ties the evidence to the claim. So while this student did a really good job of making sure they do have a claim, evidence, and a wrap up sentence or some reasoning, I think it could be stronger by being more specific, clear, and concise. So that's the first student work sample. The second student work sample is what I would call an exemplar. So I will read it to you. And the claim and the evidence and reasoning are pretty clear in this, so I didn't actually highlight it in this example. Here we go. The American dream during the Gilded Age was nothing but a pipe dream for most people in America. In the beginning of the Gilded Age, no worker unions existed, and many people, including children, had to work in unsafe conditions. Many people worked long shifts for barely enough to survive, 6 to 7 days a week. Strangely enough, children were given some of the most dangerous work. Young boys worked in coal mines and in dangerous coal chutes, where one wrong move could cost them their lives. If people were injured on the job, they got nothing, and were easily replaced. All of these contributed to the inability to attain the American dream during the Gilded Age. So this is an exemplar. It's answering the question, which you probably could have gotten from the claim, that the question was the American dream attainable during the Gilded Age? This student makes a very clear claim and provides a solid chunk of evidence. They then continue to wrap up or reason the evidence and the claim. They wrap those two together in the reasoning and really bring us back to the initial question, the initial statement, again, saying that the American dream was not attainable. Now, of course, there are areas of growth for this example. Maybe the evidence could be a little bit more specific, maybe bringing in some statistics in. However, for this student, where he is in the school year, this was, and for the rest of the class, this was an exemplar example. Now, it's really helpful to use rubrics. And on the next page, I'll share with you a rubric that I do use. Now, this is a CER rubric that I give to students for each CER that they write. So it has the claim, evidence, and reasoning. And I only go up to 3. So you can score a 3, which is the best, 2, which is obviously in the middle, or a 1. And then I have room for feedback for each of the criteria. So for claim, a 3 would be claim is stated accurately and answers the question appropriately. A 2, claim does not make appropriate connections to the task or question. A 1, claim is stated incorrectly. For evidence, here, I like my students now to have 2 pieces of evidence. So evidence for a 3, 2 pieces of evidence from text, video, experiment, picture, lecture is provided to support claim and contributes to overall understanding. For a 2, 1 piece of evidence from text, video, experiment, picture, and lecture is provided to support claim and contributes to overall understanding. And a 1, evidence is unclear or does not support the claim. For reasoning, a 3 requires students to include an accurate explanation of how the evidence supports the initial claim. For a 2, reasoning only partially supports the claim. And for a 1, reasoning does not support the claim at all. So this rubric, which you are welcome to use or to change to fit your own class, I will upload it in the resources, is something that I could easily change. I just keep it on a Google Doc. And students know it by now. So students know what to expect. But I still give it to them with every single CER. And then it also gives me a place to provide specific feedback for the claim, evidence, and reasoning.